Ja, pünktlich auf die Minute geht's los. Das allein auch der Veranstaltung geschuldet ist. Von daher nicht wundern, dass das Countdown läuft heute.
So it's all with the countdown today. So don't worry about that's how the technicians instructed us to proceed. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, like many of you here in this room, I am extremely happy. I'm very, very happy. I'm delighted because this 14th International Motorcycle Conference is a very special one. Not only because we'll have very interesting talks here in store. After the last conference, 2020, had to take place online only. We all know why. We are very happy that we convene physically, in old tradition, face-to-face, in Cologne, in the Rhine Hall here. And via the internet, of course. Of course, there are special features we all had to learn. Over the last 2.5 years, it was very, very clear for us that we need to organize this conference in a hybrid way, so that also those can participate in this conference or for who it is not possible to travel here. What is also very important is that we all here, being here, or at home in front of the screen, we pursue a common goal. We all want to reduce the number of motorbike and scooter accidents worldwide, and for this to make this goal a reality, we need your help. We need target-oriented content information solutions for the motorcyclists. For this traditional but also future-proof mobility. So on behalf of the IFZ, I would like to welcome you most cordially, all of you here, to the 14th International Motorcycle Conference. Dear colleagues, we have representatives here, participants from 17 nations here, and are prepared to discuss two-wheeler safety today and tomorrow. Thank you very much for your interest. Thanks for your commitment. Thanks for all being here, because you all contribute to significantly practice what you preach here at the IFC. I can guarantee that it is all worthwhile. The program is known. It's in 23 presentations. The root causes of motorcycle accidents, for example, play a role here, especially when it comes to collision with the other road users. It is important to networking among different vehicle types here in order to prevent such collisions from happening in the first place. But how do bikers react and respond to corresponding warnings issued by the vehicle? And how about the benefit assessment of rider assistance systems? We're excited to learn more about this. Maybe we can reduce the number of accidents with the help of automatic braking systems. With the preconditions for that is something that we're going to learn about over the next 48 hours. Electromobility, everybody talks about it, and of course it will have a natural place in the program as well. Keyword airbag systems. How can airbags in motorcyclists' clothing be useful for us? We'll learn about that as well. And also road construction is very certainly a central discussion involving powered two-wheelers. What contribution can road markings make here? Or is there typical accident patterns in group rides, for example? These are going to be other exciting talks where we get lots of information, useful information. In addition to the 23 talks we are going to have here, we had numerous other submissions. Unfortunately, we couldn't find place for them on the agenda. And for the scientific advisory board, it was very difficult to make a selection. But I think the board has been successful in selecting selecting the most appropriate technical articles from the world of bike safety for you. IFZ has been closely connected with all the members of the advisory board here, and we would like to express our heartfelt thanks to their active support. It is 23 papers that are going to be presented within the frame of this conference. This is quite a crowded program. But I can promise you that with this wealth of content, the presenting scientists will show the latest technical and human possibilities for making motorcycling even safer. Many thanks to all the presenters and the participating authors for their work, because it is their work that is going to be center stage here at the 14th International Motorcycle Conference. Dear colleagues, there's more words of praise, but this is a good thing, because many people have joined forces and made an enormous effort to make this international meeting a reality, like our cooperation partners that have made this conference possible in the first place. So we are therefore pleased, almost as a matter of course, to have at our side our long-standing partner, the MFS, the Motorcycle Safety Foundation from the US. The MFS, when IFS was founded 40 years ago, was a great role model for us. We wanted to have also a very important institute in Germany here that dedicated its work exclusively to the topic of scooter and motorbike safety, helping to reduce accident numbers and also, on the other hand, to further increase motorcycling pleasure through safety advantage. Dr. Ochs, Vice President of Training Systems at the MSF, will take the rostrum here in a few minutes.
Gemeinsam stemmen können wir diese Konferenz ebenso mit der großartigen Unterstützung des deutschen Verkehrs.
We are also very happy that we have the support of the German Road Safety Council, the DVR, for this conference. We have been working with them for decades in the field of road safety, and of course we will be looking forward to continue this good work in the future. Among other things, over the next few days here at the Intermod, the IFZ will present in Hall 9 together with us here and presenting exciting entertainment and safety relevant information to the public. Especially with a view to tomorrow, we'll have another very central partner of our conference here, the European Association of Motorcycle Manufacturers. As you all know, there will be another highlight. It's the high-level panel discussion anchored by ASEM Secretary General and esteemed colleague Antonio Perlo. Representatives from politics and industry will discuss the potential of two-wheel mobility for the traffic of the future and the associated challenges for the motorcycle industry. In order to manage this gigantic international exchange of knowledge and interest at this conference, against the backdrop of reducing the number of accidents involving bikers here, we need powerful partners. And we have them. Last but not least, we are counting on the support of the German motorcycle industry association, the IVM, and of course all its members. The IVM is a substantial sponsor of the Intermod, and together with the active support of Kölnmesse, makes this great environment and atmosphere possible. So on behalf of the IFZ, I would like to express our sincere thanks to all those involved. With a view to tomorrow, I shall add that for the first time we have scientific talent promoted and awarded tomorrow. We are delighted that the FAM has chosen this conference as the setting for the presentation of an FIM award. Right at the beginning of the second day of the conference, outstanding minds will be awarded prizes by the FIM. It is a good sign for the future that in addition to esteemed and established colleagues, also young scientists continue to find their way to the conference and into this branch of science. I would like to welcome, I wish you now a exciting and memorable conference that follows up on many ideas and concepts which inspire many other new things, which make scooter and motorbike riding even safer. As already announced, I would like to now hand over the lectern to our long-standing partner from the FSF Ochs. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Matthias. It's wonderful to be here with all of you and, of course, with those who are participating online. On behalf of the Motorcycle Safety Foundation and our President and Chief Executive Officer, Eric Pritchard, and our board and our staff, I'd like to add our welcome to the 14th International Motorcycle Conference. The theme of safety in motion is compellingly appropriate for our current circumstances and quickly changing priorities, such as electrification, autonomous vehicles, and connectivity, and there's a need for exceptionalism toward future safety initiatives that this conference provides for us as vulnerable roadway users. The MSF is proud to be associated with IFZ, and it cannot be stated too strongly how we look forward to current research, practices, and ideas that support our mission and vision. Our friends at IFZ have never failed to deliver. As many of you know, MSF is not associated with the manufacture of motorcycles, but rather addresses the human element, the rider and riding skills, behaviors, and choices. That has been our focus for many years now, in fact, nearly 50 years. Of note is that we're celebrating our 50th anniversary in 2023. Our mission is to be a leading safety resource and advocate for motorcyclists. We create world-class education training programs for riders of every experience level, and we raise public awareness for motorcycling to promote a safe riding environment. Our vision is to help motorcycle riders realize their full potential, elevating awareness of safety in order to save lives. We want riders to have the precise physical skills to navigate roadways, the mental forethought to identify hazardous factors, collision traps, and escapes, and the internal social skills to be courteous and cooperative with all roadway users. And this includes appropriate emotional skills to control the risks associated with motorcycling. The value of what we learn and contribute during this conference cannot be overstated. The interest in motorcycling is on an upward trajectory, and it is important for us to keep pace with the needs and interests of new and experienced riders. All stakeholders must function like a learning organization with a shared vision and strategies to serve all our constituents in the coming years. A shared vision to maintain our safety and learning organization, and the mental models to serve as thought leaders, including systemic deep thinking to keep all our safety initiatives recognized and thriving. Safety in motion, an interesting theme as we search for meaningful pathways to accommodate the newest generation of riders and keep motorcycling as a wise choice toward improved quality of life that only those who have a passion and aliveness for riding understand. Safety will always be in motion because there is no absolute safety. Rather, there are risks to address, manage, and minimize. Safety in motion, the big picture, our industry. In the United States, it is vibrant as it adjusts to a new normal and has potential to expand into areas of transportation recreation we could not imagine only a few short years ago. We look forward to the European Union panel, Vision 2030 Plus, the motorcycle industry's vision towards sustainable mobility in Europe. Safety in motion, the rider. In the United States, we have initiatives related to zero fatalities, Vision Zero, and a safe system approach. Whether research, legislation, engineering, education, enforcement, or emergency services, we as future stakeholders and thought leaders provide the impetus for motion into new frontiers with countermeasures that make a difference. Over the years, MSF has counted on these motorcycle conferences to inform our thinking and to give us glimpses of safety-oriented, innovative ideas for our industry and for powered two-wheelers, operators, and passengers. This year we have papers exploring topics from intelligent transportation systems to motorcycle dynamics, from braking systems to electrification, from education and training to accident analysis, and from airbag technology to group riding and more. It is the sincerest desire of MSF that this year's presenters and participants embrace safety and motion. We're all on the same team when it comes to the quality of motorcycling. Let us together find ways to better train and educate riders, improve the safety of motorcycles, and explore ways to maintain and improve effective, sustainable motorcycle safety system. The MSF wants to help expand our collective knowledge, support, encouragement, and motivation to increase value in our most noble cause, the safety and well-being of motorcycle riders everywhere. Thank you for your hard work and keen participation. We hope you anticipate a renewed passion for motorcycle safety and experience an interesting, meaningful, and fulfilling conference. Thank you very much. And with that, let's move to our first session with session chair Patrick Seiniger. So please, it's yours.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Ray. Guten Morgen von meiner Seite. Ich mache es kurz. Patrick Seiniger von der Bundesanstalt für Straßenwesen. Wir sind ein Ressort im Bereich des Bundesministeriums für Verkehr. Das heißt, wir kommen eher von der
Traffic. We are a sub-department. So we are from the regulatory side. I represent André Sick, who is the head of the department, who could unfortunately not come. But we just talked about young talents earlier. 20 years ago, it was the first conference where I participated as a young scientific advisor, so that's why I'm very pleased to be here. Dr. Sebastian Will has now the honor to deliver the first talk after all these introductory statements. He studied psychology in Würzburg. He was then at the Würzburg Institute for Traffic Sciences at the WIVW, and in his dissertation he was looking at the optimization of a traffic simulator that you can use, for example, to check response times to warnings and how you can do a proper warning. And that is what he's going to talk about in this talk.
Thank you, Patrick, for the kind introduction. I need to admit that it has not been 18 years that I attended the first conference. I only made it 10 years ago. But still, it's a nice coincidence that my first day at work has been exactly here 10 years ago on a business trip for WIVW. So I'm happy after 4 years without the chance for this kind of discussions within the community. It felt a bit like a back-to-school meeting when I came here this morning, and I'm really happy to open the first session with a presentation. And please allow me to open it with a question. And the question to you is, what takes 0.005 seconds? I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of correct answers. I see the blink of an eye. Okay, okay. First guess. So maybe the first thing to answer is a blink of an eye is a good idea, but a human being takes between 100 and 400 milliseconds for a blink of an eye. So the one that I was looking for the answer, it's the time of an ABS control unit to newly assess a situation and decide how to react. So this means we are pretty fast on the technical side, but this only makes a difference if the rider is really applying the brakes. And if we want to motivate the rider to do so by means of a warning or a notification, we were simply interested in what is an appropriate estimate for the time it takes that a rider needs to initiate a braking response towards a warning. And this motivated the study conducted by the Connected Motorcycle Consortium that I'm allowed to present today. The CMC in general is working on any different types of applications, and some of them will need to run on a passenger car, for instance, or on a truck. And there is already quite some good knowledge on which time a driver takes to react towards a warning. But what we are kind of lacking so far is a sound knowledge on how long does it take for a power two-wheeler rider to recognize a warning and react accordingly. And before we start with explaining what we did, a very important note is there is definitely no typical rider reaction time. There is not the rider reaction time. It's always a distribution, and it will make a huge difference depending on the situation you're in, for instance. It will make a huge difference which type of motorcycle you're sitting on, or whether you just woke up, had 2 freshly brewed coffees and started your ride, as compared to you're on your way back home from beautiful Rovereto in Italy, and you spent already 7 hours on the motorcycle getting back here to Cologne. Your reaction time might differ. So a bit simplified approach to explain what type of reaction we were interested in is if we imagine that there is, let's say, a potential threat, and we are in a situation where braking is the appropriate response to avoid that threat. Then we can assume that there is a certain time necessary to brake the vehicle, obviously, but before that we need to allow a certain time for the rider, if we work with a warning, to recognize that there is a warning, to understand the warning, and also to choose the appropriate reaction. So in this case, braking. And with the CMC, we've especially been interested in that part of the reaction time distributions that takes longer. We were not interested in the fastest possible responses that will definitely occur if we observe this behavior on the streets. We were interested in how long is kind of the longest average time we need to allow for a rider to react, to perceive that warning and to react, so that the majority of riders can benefit from such an application. And therefore we've chosen a so-called conservative approach, and I will explain a bit more what exactly that means. So the first decision we made is the topic is still rather new, so we said we will start with a study on the dynamic motorcycle riding simulator at WIVW, with the benefit of having a full control over the setup, over the potentially critical situations, without endangering the riders. We have chosen to work with a very simplified and generic visual warning in the dashboard. We have deliberately made the decision to not include an auditory note, for instance, which would, of course, decrease the reaction time itself, so people react faster. But as I said in the beginning, we were interested in that part of the distribution with the riders that take longer. So we said, okay, let's work with this kind of conservative setup. The warning appears 3 seconds before a potentially critical situation became visible. And it lasted for 3 seconds, and it disappeared when the potential threat was visible to the rider. The riders participating in the study were told that their motorcycle is equipped with such a CITS system. So we told them roughly how such a system generally works. We told them what a warning, what a notification typically looks like, and also what an appropriate reaction, so in this case decelerating the vehicle, would be. It's of course important that we did not tell the riders that the study is about measuring their reaction times, because that would create a kind of artificial setup, and it's more a gamification of the setup. So we just told them we are interested in their general opinion of such a modern CITS safety application, and they have the chance to experience it in the simulator. I brought some screenshots from the simulation for you to get a better understanding on how such a test scenario evolved. So in this case, we included a rural test setup. So we have a rider going on a nice and slightly curvy rural road. And then at some point in time, the warning, the notification was issued. This is 3 seconds prior to when the obstacle, in this case a construction site, the truck here became visible after a tight right-hand bend, and then the riders had to approach that situation and pass that situation, And it's important to notice that the rider behavior while avoiding this truck was not in the focus of our research. The interesting period was between warning onset and when this potential threat became visible, those 3 seconds. So this was one of the test scenarios in the rural environment, and I also brought a picture from the urban environment. So you can see here a crossing, and the power two-wheeler rider has the right-of-way, and there is a car coming from the right-hand side, which was, let's say, hidden behind a building close to the road, so the riders could not see that vehicle. And that car was violating the right-of-way and entered the lane of the motorcyclist. And here are the measures we were interested in. If you do a quick Google search on reaction time, you will find 100 of different definitions for what a reaction time is. And these were the 3 reactions we were interested in within CMC. On the left-hand side, you see the warning onset, which is always, let's say, T0. This is where the calculation starts. Then the first reaction time is how long does it take for the rider to take a look down to the dashboard, so kind of to recognize the warning. The second reaction time is how long does it take from warning onset until the first reaction in terms of deceleration was observable, so this means throttle off. And the third reaction time was the initiation of the braking itself. It is obvious that not for every rider in every scenario we could observe all these 3 reaction types, because, for instance, if a rider judges the situation to not be critical enough, it was absolutely okay for him or her to decide there's no need for braking. So we have a different number of observations for the different parameters. And this is roughly how the procedure was. So the participants arrived at our research institute. There was a short introduction on what the study is about, followed by some familiarization rides on the simulator in an urban environment, in a rural environment. These were all trained participants on the simulator, so the control of the vehicle was not an issue to them anymore. And then the test ride followed, and the test ride took about 30 minutes, and it contained 6 different test scenarios, twice the rural scenario, twice the urban scenario, and 2 baseline scenarios, which means exactly the same trajectories, geometry, but there was no warning issued. Of course, the environment looked different so that the people could not recognize or expect that there is something to happen. And then we closed the study with a final inquiry. And the scenarios that we've chosen to include here were also motivated by the accidentology, the accident research within CMC, but Hennes Fischer will give you more insights into that topic later on this session. Here are the participants that participated in the study. So it was 24 people, 3 of which were female, aged between 20 and 60 years of age. And I would say a certain spread regarding their riding experience. And now we come to the results. What have we seen? What have we recognized? We start with a parameter of the gaze reaction. Quite some information on the slide, but I will guide you through that step by step. The first thing we need to know is that every single cross indicates a measurement in one test scenario by one rider. And the orange vertical line indicates the time period where the warning was visible. And the first thing that we can recognize is we always see a baseline row for the urban and the rural setup. And we can see that even in the baseline, there are gazes towards the dashboard. There are more gazes to the dashboard in the urban scenario than on the rural road, which somehow makes sense because in the urban scenario, the riders had to control their current speed. There is a speed limit of 50 kilometers per hour. And on the rural setup, the riders relied more on their feeling whether the speed is appropriate for the next curve. The second thing to mention is that we have obviously more observations as soon as a warning was issued. So the warning generally succeeded in creating a gaze, an orientation towards the dashboard. The third important information here is, if we look to the table on the right, that on average, it took about 1 second for the riders to recognize this purely visual warning on the dashboard, while the people are faster in the urban environment, where we have more control gazes towards the dashboard anyway, as compared to the rural setup, with about 300 milliseconds of difference. And the third important thing to notice is that there is a considerable spread in the observations. So it's not a homogeneous reaction across participants, across situations. You always have people that react fast and those that react slow, and there is the majority lies somewhere in between, as we can see here on the upper left side. If we take a look at the deceleration reactions and start with the throttle offset and start with the numbers, we can see that in half of the observations, it took longer than 1.5 seconds to initiate that response. So the median value is above 1.5 seconds. And we also see, once again, a quite considerable spread. And the same pattern can be observed for the braking response. Here it takes more than 2.5 seconds for the riders to initiate that braking. We also have some missed warnings that do not create a plus sign here at all in that graph. And we once again see a quite considerable spread in reaction times. So to put it in a nutshell, on the summary slide, we can see that the course of action that we observed in the study was exactly as expected. So the first reaction was there is an orientation, a gaze towards the dashboard, followed by the throttle off response, and then the initiation of the braking. We can also see that the scenario itself, so the urban environment as compared to the rural environment, makes a difference. We cannot really tell exactly what the difference or what the reasons for this difference is at this point in time. Obviously, there is a different speed, for instance. Obviously, there is another level of activity in the environment. In the urban environment, you had pedestrians or bicycles. There was much more activity as compared to the rural road. So there are different explanations for that, but we just need to recognize that it's the way it is. And we also see that there is a huge variety between observations. And even if it's really difficult to find a fair comparison to the world of passenger car research, where there is way more data available, I brought some numbers at least with that orange lines. The orange vertical lines indicate average reaction times from ISO standards, for instance, but also reaction times gathered in simulator studies on a passenger car simulator. Obviously, they used a different type of warning, or they used different scenarios, for instance. But still, the pattern that we can somehow recognize is, besides the fact that they have less missed warnings observed, they typically publish faster reactions and way more homogeneous reactions, which should just lead to the conclusion that a power two-wheeler cannot be regarded as a passenger car on two wheels. So there is some kind of difference. So what does it mean? What was our conclusion when we had the data available? The first thing is we had deliberately chosen this kind of scientific approach using the riding simulator. Of course, always with a kind of disadvantage that you face a discussion on the generalizability of the results and so on. But if we would have chosen at this stage to conduct the study with a real motorcycle in public traffic or on a test track, it would have been the reaction times gathered on this specific motorcycle with a dashboard mounted at 35 degrees downward angle. And the people would obviously question whether it would be fair to generalize those results to a completely different type of bike. So at this stage, the advantages prevailed from our point of view to have a controlled setup to have repeated scenarios with exactly the same things happening, to have a standardized setup to get a first impression on what reaction times of motorcycle riders in this case are. We had also included a bunch of, let's say, dummy scenarios that looked exactly the same than the test scenarios, but without anything happening, to avoid any kind of expectancy effects or sequence effects, and all this worked very well. We also had to notice that this very conservative way of notifying a rider, a red rectangle, worked at least for the majority of riders in this setup to notice the warning. But it also shows that any system, any warning system in a comparable application that will be on the roads, and that will include auditory warnings, for instance, or that will include any flashing lights or whatever, might lead to faster reactions than what we've observed here, and will also decrease the number of missed warnings, both of which are very important for the safety for sure, but also for the acceptance of the riders. Because someone that bought a motorcycle with that type of application will definitely be keen to notify every warning. Whether he or she decides to react to it, that is up to the people itself. But if I miss a warning as rider, that would definitely decrease the acceptance. So what to conclude? The first thing to mention is we now have these distributions of rider reaction times, and they can be used for OEMs or for tier 1 suppliers or every stakeholder that designs an own warning to somehow measure the effect of their warning in a comparable setup. So we did not really have a tool so far to measure whether the warning is good or not. If I can jump 2 meters from here to Patrick, I don't really know whether 2 meters is good or bad as long as I've not observed the other colleagues here jumping. And that is exactly what we did. There is a first kind of a baseline measurement that helps us. The second important thing is, even if it's really hard to compare, we see that there is a difference to the passenger car world. So it calls for power two-wheeler rider specific investigations to really rely on the data. At least that is the information we have at this point in time. And the third important aspect is more and more is done with the means of simulation. So we have, for instance, a car and a power two-wheeler repeatedly entering the same crossing hundreds of times in the world of simulation, and you can tune different parameters and see what the effectiveness of such an application is. And those simulation models, they rely on a rider behavior model. If the simulation triggers a warning at some point in time to the rider, the simulation must know what is the time frame now until I initiate the braking of the rider. So we need a rider behavior model. And the data set that we've created within CMC now, we think is really valuable to tune these rider behavior models, which can definitely create another big safety benefit as a result of our research. And that already brings me to the end of my presentation. I would like to thank all the different CMC members contributing to this study. And of course, I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take the questions you might have.
Thank you, Sebastian. Since you chose to give your presentation in English, probably we do our question session also in English. Are there questions from the floor or from the virtual world? If not, I would have one, but are there questions? Please take the microphone. Oh, there's one, please. There's the microphone. Please introduce yourself quickly with your name and affiliation.
Hello, I'm Pierre-François Tissot from InEmotions. I would be interesting to know if you are planning to investigate whether could be the most different ways to interface between human and machines, because you use eyes, obviously. Mm-hmm. What about vibration systems in the gloves or something like this?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question, a very good question. Of course, this is a matter of discussion within CMC. The decision to go for this very generic and purely visual setup was, as I said, responds to this conservative approach, so measure the long reaction times, and if from a technical perspective we can allow this time, this would create the biggest benefit. But yeah, we discuss exactly that also within CMC, because for any application out on the roads, of course, it would be more important to create reaction times as ideal as possible, as fast as possible. So we also discuss the matter of haptics, of course, of acoustic warnings. There is quite some research on the passenger car domain already that we can kind of rely on, because it's still a human being sitting on the motorcycle or in the car. And we try to account for the differences in ergonomics, for instance, different angles and so on. But let's see what we can present in 2 years' time in the next conference time. Thank you.
Any other questions? Raphael.
Hi, Raphael Pless, also from the WIVW. Hi, Sebastian. We've seen a considerable delay between throttle off and braking. And do you have some idea how that delay happens, and if that might be somehow possible to reduce that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the main thing we think makes a difference in the observations we made is what the scenario actually looked like. So we also had a smaller difference in the urban setup as compared to the rural setup, and it might simply be a reason of the people perceived the warning. The first intuitive response is throttle off, so we had no rider accelerating after the warning was issued. But then typically the people want to understand the situation, so the gaze was not towards the dashboard anymore, but towards the environment, and it seemed a bit as if the people had kind of made another judgment whether braking, which is a more harsh version of decelerating, of course, is appropriate for the specific scenario. And the urban crossing was more time critical, so we had less difference between throttle off and braking. And the rural scenario was, of course, there was more time available. You had the tight curve, and you saw that there is something on the roads, so people just took the time to make their own judgment. I would say that is the major difference. You're kindly invited to discuss data next time also with us. Okay?
Okay, so if there's nothing else, please allow me one quick thing. I come from the regulatory world, and there we speak about mandatory collision warnings and information signals. And I think what you're referring to here is what we consider as an information, since there's no imminent threat attached to it, which is probably fine to have the rectangle, whereas when we have something time critical like imminent collision, act now, otherwise you will crash into something, that we typically use acoustics. And then we call the one thing we call warning, and the other one we call information. But that's maybe also an explanation why there's a difference between the passenger car data, which is typically collision warnings, acoustics, and the motorcycle data. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah, the warning cascade would make a difference.
Right. We will stay with the warning.
Yes, really good. Thank you.
We will stay with the warning. Thank you, Sebastian. And the next presenter is Aki Lumiaho from VTT in Finland. And he will be speaking to us about providing the powered two-wheeler rider a safer riding with cooperative collision warning. So again, the warning. And Aki has quite an impressive CV here. He worked, amongst others, he worked with Nokia. He worked with the European Commission in DG INFSOC, and he worked with a few companies in Finland, and then he returned at some point to VTT, and the position as a motorcycle research lead means that's nice, because there are obviously more than one person doing motorcycle research, which is always a good thing. So, Aki, please.
Thank you, Patrick, for this kind introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is now to address some applications targeted to provide more safety for the riders. It is based on our research in a couple of European projects, namely 5G MOBIX, and then the national part of the 5G Safe Plus. We have established this connected cooperative power two-wheeler research, in response to some, well, let's say, unfriendly messages around, meaning that there have been several fatal accidents where cooperative cars have killed motorcyclists, even police motorcyclists. So nobody is safe from these wild cooperative vehicles. Then the reason is there that the power two-wheelers are not correctly detected or identified or classified as motorcycles due to misinterpretation of data in the ARAS systems. Another good eye-opening was done by the Dutch Vehicle Administration regarding the modern cars, ARAS systems and ACC radars capabilities to identify motorcyclists. We see that, in fact, the modern cars and even in a short future, also the connected and cooperative cars may be one of the main threats that we cannot manage as motorcyclists. We would like to see that the motorcyclists and motorcycles would be more involved in the European research of connected cooperative automated mobility, meaning that as Sebastian already mentioned, the cars and the motorcycles are so very much different from each other. The riders and drivers differ significantly in their reactions, and also the capabilities of the modern sensors like radars, laser scanners, lidars, and cameras are not yet sufficiently developed. But for us, it's not quite clear why the motorcycle industry is not so involved in the European research. Is there a lack of push, lack of pull, lack of tech, or lack of business? We see this connected and cooperative motorcycle platform as a circle of life, meaning that there are several topics that need to be solved and implemented also for the successful deployment of connected and cooperative motorcycles. That is, of course, the accidentology that Hennes will be discussing in depth. And also we have seen also all those reports of MAIDs and KIDAs. So there's a lot of information available. We need just to work into it. Then the advanced rider assistance systems, they are still in their infancy. We are not quite sure how and which way the industry is going. We see the first steps which are most welcome already and would like to see more development taking place. The communication between vehicles, that is something that in the future will be essential for the safety of riders. I say this because the shortcomings on various technologies deployed in the vehicles, and then we as a motorcyclist, we need to be also in charge of our driving or our riding and also our safety. Then for the safety, there's also this environment perception around the motorcycle. That means that we need to know what's happening behind us, but also very much what is happening in front of us. We cannot forget what is behind us because there's somebody that might be not visualizing us in the safety systems. Then the highlight of this circle of life is these cooperative functionalities. That would mean that the cars and motorcycles will discuss with each other, provide their trajectories, their positions, their speed, even their intentions. And that is how we get warnings and advice and even assist. Sebastian's work on this warning aspects and reaction time is very much crucial to implement this kind of functionalities. Then, how we see this to be implemented on the motorcycle. We have defined our connected motorcycle functional architecture, which is based on 3 extravehicular knowledge, meaning the rider skills, our personal characteristics when we are riding, and of course reaction times. Then the traffic situation around us, as I mentioned, also behind us, but very much in a frontal area. And then the environment perception to detect any obstacles that are not yet visible for our eyes. Then in artificial intelligence that will be implemented, or that we have been implemented already in our software and algorithms, there's of course the communications and applications part, where the communication is established between the vehicles, and then the applications for various kinds of warnings and assist. And there are the CMC application specifications. They have provided very good stepping stone for development. Then the decision making, what will be done based on this information that has been gathered. Then the rider warning strategies, meaning that which kind of warnings will be provided for the rider. The visual is of course one, but there's also a bunch of other interesting issues that have been studied already in, let's say, 8 years ago in one of the European projects. Then the HMI manager, which will decide how the information will be presented to the rider. And then, of course, the actual HMI for advice presentation or even assist functionalities. Then to one of the applications that we have been implemented in the European projects, that is how the connected automated vehicle will interact with the oncoming powered two-wheeler. This scenario is based on the situation where the connected automated vehicle detects the pedestrian on the roadside, and then there's an oncoming motorcycle that will be or that need to be avoided to crash with it. So just for this cooperative collision warning, we have proceeded to the phase where we are talking about safe overtake assist. The basic scenario in the 5G Safe Plus project was that this event, there's the vehicles, there's a pedestrian, there's the 5G network with the mobile edge computing solution, and there are roadside units like cameras or lidars to detect the pedestrian. First of all, this pedestrian, there's a possibility to send information from the user device. There's also the connected automated vehicles, which is driving to west, and on the same, on conflicting trajectory with the pedestrian, and they are publishing the maneuver coordination message, the trajectory that has been currently calculated. And the same thing takes place on the motorcycle, so the motorcycle is publishing its maneuver coordination message, which is in fact enhancement or enlargement of cooperative appearance message. Then, of course, the car wants to pass the pedestrian without colliding himself or her. At time point 1, the roadside unit detects the pedestrian, or the pedestrian user device sends the cooperative perception message to the MEC server, and then the message is then published, and the car and the motorcycle are receiving it. Then the motorcycle publishes its maneuver coordination, meaning the trajectory, speed, direction, location, etc. And then the automated vehicle receives this message. The MEC includes the calculation module, but it's also available in the vehicles, so that depending on whether the cooperative automated vehicle can make any calculations, it will be also possible to provide from the mobile edge computing server. The next time spot is when the planned trajectory will be changed in order not to collide with the pedestrian. And then the various alerts, the car itself makes calculations and identifies the possibility for a crash, and then the desired trajectory is calculated on the vehicle, on the car, and then it detects that, okay, this is now in conflict with the power two-wheeler maneuver. Then the power two-wheeler receives the new planned desired trajectory of the car. In the next phase, the power two-wheeler is planning to continue on a safe trajectory moving forward, and the car now detects that, okay, this planned trajectory to bypass the pedestrian is not safe, so the other possibility is to calculate a new trajectory that will end up even stopping before the pedestrian, in a sense that they will not collide with the motorcycle. And then the result will be that the automated car makes its maneuvering to avoid the pedestrian and the motorcyclist, and the motorcyclist then still continues on a safe trajectory. The automated vehicle continues as well, so the situation is solved safely and taking into account the vehicles around and their maneuvering. Then something on the results themselves. We measured, for instance, round-trip timing from the MQTT server on the 5G non-standalone network, and the results show that there's a variation regarding the result of the round-trip timing. That is I believe, the green, the green arrow in the figure, showing that, okay, we are around below 50 milliseconds result. That was one of the targets, because on the 4G network, we received the round-trip timing around 100 milliseconds. Then for this maneuver coordination message from the motorcycle to the car and vice versa, the results were overall in a region of 70–80 milliseconds. And in some cases, we are below this 50 milliseconds. However, it's not yet fully achieved in each of the measuring points. What this will mean from the rider's perspective. If we take a non-equipped powered two-wheeler versus this connected cooperative powered two-wheeler with environment perception, if we take a few of the most important crash types or accident types, whether it's a single vehicle accident or a vehicle accident with other vehicles in different traffic scenarios, there's one specific outcome. Usually, when it's a single vehicle accident, there is no information regarding this accident taking place, since we don't have yet the e-call service for the powered two-wheelers or the devices. But when it's about collisions with other vehicles, the usual outcome with a non-equipped vehicle is that, sorry mate, I didn't see you. That's unfortunate for us, not the car drivers. When we have the connected powered two-wheeler with some own capabilities, the situation is different. The single vehicle accident will be made available. The information regarding this accident will be made available, and even in some cases when there's an environmental perception, a capability to detect the obstacles which might lead to this single vehicle accident, the event may be even avoided. But when it's with the other vehicles, of course the motorcycle shows their presence, their speed, their direction, which makes them visible for the connected vehicles. Even if the connected vehicle sensors themselves do not yet detect or classify the motorcycle correctly. So as a conclusion, it is easy to say that the connected powered two-wheeler and environment perception provides safer riding for us. And the consequence of any incidents will be that, okay, we can forget the smithy, and we can receive in all avoided crashes that, okay, yes, I saw you, no harm done, we are both safe and sound. Thank you.
Thank you, Aki, for the interesting presentation. And are there any questions from the floor or from the virtual world? That's, looking to the colleagues from IFZ, anything from the internet? Probably not. So then, please allow me to give one optimistic remark. And the one optimistic remark is that I do work in the regulations for automated vehicles, and motorcycles specifically are part of the test section there. So I would assume that we will not see any vehicles being driven really automatically that will not detect motorcycles. But on the other hand, yes, I agree, there are some vehicles currently in assistant mode that probably do not see them.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. One question maybe, I think you considered that You spoke a lot about connected information coming from going between the vehicles. What potential do you see for onboard sensors? Because you will have probably mixed traffic for quite a long time.
Indeed, it will be mixed traffic for 50 or more years. So whenever the powered two-wheeler might be equipped with additional sensors, and if the technology for the sensors is on the way as we like to see it, the radar themselves, they are quite good for detecting objects. However, the classification of the objects might be not so convincing because of the lack of density of the radio beams sent by the radars. Also, some issues with human detection when a person is walking across the trajectory of the vehicles, even though most of the radars can separate the let's say, moving feet or legs. Then LiDAR laser scanners, they are quite good in classification, but also they are quite, there are quite many shortcomings regarding the LiDAR capability, even though the beams, light beams are much, there are much more light beams than radar beams in the radar. But when it's a rain or fog or smog, the LiDARs may suffer because the density and the size and the characteristics of the raindrops is not known because it's not standardized. It will happen what it will happen. And for the camera, of course, in bad weather conditions, it's quite effortless, and detection and even classification in good weather conditions is quite capable for the cameras. But then in the bad weather conditions, they will suffer also. So to conclude, if a vehicle, whether it's a car or motorcycle, is only equipped with one sensor, that will not definitely cover all the traffic and weather conditions around us.
Thank you, Aki, and to this I can agree. So, thank you for the presentation and the discussion, and then let's move on towards something more, I would say, more driving dynamics orientated by Ludwig Stolle. Is your presentation in English or German? In English. Okay, so I continue with using English here. So Ludwig has a Bachelor of Engineering from University of Stuttgart, and then moved on to the University of Munich to do an automotive engineering master's there with a focus on vehicle dynamics and assistance systems. And since April last year, Ludwig works as a PhD student at Bosch, Robert Bosch Corporate Research in Renningen. So obviously you are in the position where, at the state of your career where I was about 18 years ago when I was attending my first conference. So he will be speaking about the importance of motorcycle rider upper body movement for rider intention detection and motorcycle state prediction. So I'm very curious. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for your introduction. Yes, I'm happy to share our work results on this topic on the importance of the upper body movements for vehicle dynamics, and our applications for this one would be the rider intention detection and the situation detection. So I want to start with our overall motivation. So our overall goal is to reduce the number of power two-wheeler accidents and so reduce the number of injured and fatalities. Our approach is to develop ARAS systems that are capable of warning, preventing, or intervening in dangerous situations better than today's systems. Therefore, we do need knowledge of the rider behavior, of the motorcycle behavior, and very important, about the future rider intention. So when I talk about future, what I'm exactly talking about, so if we break down the driving task of a motorcycle rider, according to the Donges model, we can divide into three main tasks that differ in their time horizon. So when the rider plans his whole journey, he's doing a navigation task. So this time horizon is not addressed by our work. Then, if he follows his route, he constantly is doing a guidance task where he just plans the upcoming trajectory on the road. So he maybe perceives the next corners by his eyes, or maybe he perceives a pothole just in front of him, and the rider then decides where exactly he wants to travel on the road. And this trajectory that he plans is then realized on the stabilization level of the motorcycle. And we are exactly measuring on the stabilization level, and we want to interpret on the guidance level what the rider is doing. So this is exactly what my PhD project is about, and it aims at such algorithms that can predict the rider intention. And the first focus in this research topic was to understand how is the motorcycle rider actually cornering. So how is he using the different input measures that he can take to ride on a corner with the motorcycle. Of course, there is the very important steer torque, but on motorcycles, as you know, there's also the roll torque, so the body movements of the motorcycle rider that he can use for riding the motorcycle. There is state-of-the-art research on rider inputs for cornering. It started in the late 70s, where the studies that were done back then were aiming at handling improvements of motorcycles by specific motorcycle designs. And they back then came to the conclusion that the steer torque input is the most important input by far, and that when they design a motorcycle for good handling, it's enough to only consider steer torque, and they do not need to consider any roll movements of the motorcycle rider. Then over all the years, there were some investigations about riding skill and riding styles. Those are very often qualitative descriptions of riding styles. And we saw that some of the descriptions of riding styles are somehow contradictory. And when with the ever-increasing computational power, of course, the need for rider models and simulations came up. And there are some recent research in this topic, and they conclude that if you want to realize high-performance riding simulations, so really on the physical limit of the motorcycle, you do need the second rider input of rider movements, of rider roll torque again. So we are, in this work, looking on rider upper body movements only, as the upper body of the rider has the highest share of mass, of course. And it's the one part of the body that most of the normal riders are using solely. So normal riders do not stretch their legs when they're entering a corner normally. So we do our own experiments, or we did our own experiments due to three main reasons. First reason was we wanted to have multiple operating points in our measured in our experiments, in the stationary as well in the transient dynamics domain, and we combined it with multiple riders. Then we wanted to have a quantitative description of how the inputs are used. So not only qualitative, the one comes after the other, but we wanted to have exact numbers. And of course, we wanted to find our own truth regarding of the riding styles that were described in the literature somehow different. So here is our picture of our experimental setup. So we have an adventure test bike, you can see in the middle, and to measure the upper body position of our rider, we use optical markers applied to the rider's back, and we can then evaluate the position of the markers in our image and can then calculate the rider position relative to the motorcycle position. So we exactly calculate a rider lean angle and a lateral offset of the rider compared to the motorcycle center plane, which you can see here in blue color in this image. Our measurement setup reaches an accuracy of under a millimeter in standard deviation, and in extreme situations like fastest rider movements or very strong high hanging off positions, we have a maximum error of a centimeter. In the lower left graph, that's an example measurement of how the rider movements look, for example, in a single lane change maneuver. Of course, we also measured the steer torque rider input. This one was realized via strain gauges of the handlebar, and this sensor has a standard deviation of 1 Newton meter. So just to give you a feeling of the accuracy when we later talk about the results. And again, there is here a measurement of a single lane change that you can get an impression of how great are the steer torques in, for example, such a severe single lane change maneuver of, with a maximum amplitude 0 of 40 Newton meters. We realized 3 different maneuvers. The first one in this table is the constant cornering maneuver. This is, of course, used for the stationary dynamics analysis. This one was done at different radii and at different velocities. Then we have a slalom maneuver. This is very well suited for the system identification, as in a single slalom, only one frequency at one amplitude is excited of the motorcycle. And of course, a slalom is not really road realistic. No one is doing ideal slaloms on the roads. So we had a lane change as well. And this lane change should provide us more the natural riding behavior, as lane changes at different dynamics are done quite often. So we just come to the first results at the constant cornering situation. So in the right graph, you see many data points. Each data point represents a stationary condition. So the rider was riding with constant roll angle and constant speed, a full cycle on our constant skid pad, or constant radius skid pad. Then each of the data points that are interconnected are from a single run. And we have here the results for a single rider that was doing 3 different runs with 3 different riding styles. So first of all, he rode with his natural riding style. This is indicated by the circle markers. That's the line in the middle. The lower 2 graphs show that the riders, or this particular rider, sits very upright in his normal riding style. So he has almost 0-degree lean angle and 0-degree lateral offset. So he's really in line with the motorcycle. Now this rider was asked to intentionally lean out. So he's leaning his upper body relative to the motorcycle to the outside of the corner, so into the upright position. This is indicated by the triangle markers. And you can see the effect on steer torque in the upper left graph. The steer torque demand for this motorcycle to drive on the constant corner changes severely by 8 to 10 Newton meters. And the same effect applies in the other direction if the rider was asked to do an intentional lean in. So he was very much hanging off of the motorcycle. You can see in the lower right graph, he was shifting his seat point by almost 15 centimeters into the corner. This again had the effect of severely changing the steer torque. So we concluded for us, the steer torque demand can be altered significantly. That's also a reason why riders move up or change upper body position, because they can change the steer torque demand. In the upper right graph, you can see a secondary effect of hanging off or pushing or leaning out. That is that the roll angle demand of the motorcycle is changed with different riding styles. So with the hanging out or lean in riding style, you can see the motorcycle has the least demand for roll angle to drive on this trajectory. Our conclusion is that if we measure the steer torque signal, we cannot interpret the steer torque signal without knowing the rider upper body position in such a constant cornering situation, as the rider's position is just too much influencing what is the actual steer torque demand. Coming to the transient maneuvers, I first want to talk about the slalom we did. We had the slaloms were done by 2 riders. And each of the data point in this graph is exactly 1 run through a slalom. So we changed the geometry of the slalom. This is indicated by the different colors. And we, of course, changed the velocity when going through the slalom. This is shown by the different frequencies that were excited during the slalom. You can see on the x-axis. Now, on the y-axis in this plot, we have the rider lean amplitude. So how much was the rider using his upper body in the slalom maneuver? And you can see quite good by the different groups of lines that our 2 riders, rider A and B, they had very different riding styles. So rider B uses double the amount of lean compared to rider A in this slalom. Plus, we have two red measurements where a rider was asked to intentionally lean out quite heavily with here 25 degrees relative lean angle. And one thing maybe that's clear for you, I just want to mention, the riders are always in the slalom leaning opposite to the motorcycle. So when the motorcycle moves beneath them, they tend to keep the upper body upright. Now to find out what's the influence of this different riding styles of our two riders on the vehicle dynamics, we analyze here the amplification of a steer torque input to a motorcycle movement, so to the motorcycle reaction. High values of this amplification mean that the motorcycle is very agile, has very good handling. So you can see an overall trend, which is true for all motorcycles, that with rising velocities, the handling of motorcycles decreases due to mostly gyroscopic effects. But now we are interested in the differences between the data points for the same velocities. And you can see that for the black curve, which was the slalom run in the very small slalom at low velocities, the different riding styles of our two riders really have an effect on the transfer behavior of the bike. So rider B found a motorcycle that was much more agile than rider A. For all the other runs, and especially for all data points above 60 kilometers per hour, it doesn't matter what the rider is doing on top of the motorcycle, because the handling of the motorbike is, in terms of amplification, not changed anymore. Talking about the timing, so we now had an impression the rider is using steer torque, the riders are using lean angle in this slalom. But when exactly are they lean, when do they steer? That one we wanted to find out. And first of all, in this graph, there is the analysis of the rider leaning compared to the motorcycle rolling. So if rider and motorcycle move exactly in anti-phase, that is the case indicated by the little sketch on the right, this is defined as a 0-second time delay between leaning and motorcycle movement. So that would mean if the motorcycle is most to the right, the rider would lean most to the left. Now we can see in the data points from the slalom that for velocities above 50 kilometers per hour, our riders were always leaning reactive, so they were leaning after the motorcycle movement. Now you might say, okay, slalom is quite artificial. Let's have a look on the more road realistic maneuver of single lane change. And here we can see exactly the same behavior, that for velocities above 50 kilometers per hour, our riders were leaning after the motorcycle moved. If we compare the rider leaning not to the roll angle of the motorcycle, but to the first rider input of steer torque, this time gap gets even severe or even bigger. So now we can see that in all the data points we measured, the rider lean movement came over half a second after the rider steer input. So for us, we can conclude that the rider leaning movement in transient maneuvers like slalom and like lane change is only reactive. It's no direct input. So for us, for our detection task of rider intention, it's not a predictor for an upcoming maneuver, as it's a very reactive behavior of the rider. But we wanted to find out, okay, why are the riders exactly leaning in the way they do? Because the one reason I already said is the riders lean opposite to the roll angle of the motorcycle, and this is because they want to have the upper body more upright. So this is often described in literature for comfort and for control, because if they have the body upright, they most of the time also have the head upright, and they then have a horizontal field of view, which gives them better control of the current situation. But we thought there must be an exact reason maybe for the exact timing of rider lean. And the hypothesis is that the rider lean in a certain way to assist the generation of steer torque. So this is what the little sketch should show. So if the rider wants to apply a positive steer torque indicated by the red arrows, he could sit in a straight line, but he could also move his upper body a bit to the right, and therefore uses his body weight to assist the application of the positive steer torque. Now, if we want to check our hypothesis here on these data, on the transient data, we cannot think in statics, we have to think in dynamic movements. So I just want to show 3 corner cases for the sinusoidal signals of rider lean movement and rider steer torque input. So we analyze we look at the phase delay between the steer torque and the rider lean. So if we would have a 90-degree phase delay, that would mean the rider leans after the steer torque amplitude. So if you imagine the rider is leaning towards the right-hand side, as indicated in the lower right sketch, he would need to take back the positive steer torque up to the point where he reaches the most right position. And when moving upwards again, he would need to apply a negative steer torque. If you think about this pattern of inputs, this is not really reasonable in such a slalom, and it feels unnatural if you just recap this situation. I think the 0-degree case is quite clear. If you lean most to the right, you apply the highest positive steer torque. And there is a minus 90-degree phase delay case, which would mean the rider pulls himself or herself towards the side that he leans, and then he pushes himself away again from the handlebar. And this, in our opinion, is quite a logical way of using the upper body as a support. Now we can analyze this phase angle for all our data points, and we see that for all velocities above 30 to 35 kilometers per hour, we are exactly in this 0 to minus 90-degree region. So this physiological explanation is reasonable as another reason why riders do leaning in the exact timing they do or they did in our tests. All data points below 30 kilometers per hour are kind of hard to judge because this is exactly the unstable region of the motorcycle. So the motorcycle is not safe stable here. We saw in all the transfer behaviors that the behavior change is quite severe if we drive in the unstable region. And another thing that is interesting when we look at these data points is that we can see also here a difference in riding styles between our riders. So we earlier saw that rider B uses much more rider lean than rider A. And we can now see that the rider B with the triangle markers is also more on the minus 90-degree side, whilst rider A is more towards the 0-degree phase angle between his two inputs. So this is also a result we saw that we can also see or differ between the riding styles in this kind of evaluation of the phase angle. So to sum up our results on the importance of rider movement, we saw that in stationary cornering situations, rider upper body position is very important because steer torque is super insensitive to different rider positions. So if we want to predict or evaluate what's the situation during constant cornering phase of a curve, we need the upper body position to, otherwise the steer torque signal is not useful in these situations. But it's very different if we are in transient maneuvers, and if we only are interested in maneuvers above 60 kilometers per hour, the effect of a rider movement or a rider position is minor compared to the other effects that are deciding what kind of or what amount of steer torque the rider needs in such a situation. We also found out that rider lean is reactive, as I showed with all the data points. So for us, it's no direct predictor of an upcoming maneuver. And beside the well-known effects of riders choose their upper body position for comfort and control, we also showed that in transient, the upper body timing can be chosen for a low steer torque effort, but this, of course, depends on riding styles. This is not the end of our research in the topics of rider inputs and rider intention detection. We now move on and want to find out if there are certain rider movement patterns that indicate certain maneuvers or certain situations the rider is in. Of course, we cannot use the data or the experiments that I've shown now in this presentation for getting to know typical patterns. We need measurements from the real road traffic, and this is exactly what we are targeting now. So now I'm open to your questions and any further exchange on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ludwig. That's quite an impressive presentation. Sounds like a sound research project that you're aiming for. And I think it's very good for the motorcycle community to understand how riders behave there. We have a constant delay of 5 minutes, which I want to keep, so 5 minutes for questions. There's a question. Please take the microphone.
Urs Dobler, motorcycle driving instructor in Switzerland. Could you tell us something about the two riders? What the riders have been, and then you did your studies on an adventure bike, and did you ever think about using other motorcycles like cruisers with a low center of gravity and with a wide handlebars, etc.?
So our riders, our 3 riders in total, and 2 riders were in each comparison, were all more or less experienced riders. We had no amateurs, but also no professional riders. We differ in experience. We also differ a bit in body size and body weight. But the differences that come from body size and body weight, we investigated in a motorcycle simulation beforehand. And we saw that the differences between our riders have an effect on steer torque that's below 1.5 Newton meters. So this influence of the body properties is there, but it's very small. So it's almost below the detection accuracy of our measurement system. And the experience, of course, differ, but this was also lucky for us because the result could also have been that both riders have exactly the same riding style in slaloms, and then it would have been quite hard to instruct them now to ride in a different style because we need different styles to evaluate the effect of different styles. So this was our luck in this case. About the motorcycle, that's a very good question. I know that motorcycles have a very large influence also on riding styles and, of course, on their overall dynamics behavior. In our research, or my research project especially, I'm now focused to this test bike, and all the other bikes we could only investigate in simulations. So we would then take the measured behavior we have now and apply this behavior to other bikes. That would be an idea to find out if bikes with low center of gravity, for example, or very sporty bikes have a different sensitivity to rider inputs.
Yeah, there's a question from Sebastian from the podium.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. Human behavior or intention detection, wearing my psychological glasses, is always very challenging, unfortunately, in every domain of human being. What I would be interested in is what is roughly the time frame that you are aiming to predict?
So the time frame for prediction is in a range between 2 and 4 seconds. So these are the numbers that we are now getting from application side, and also we know that from the pure physical, the information content in the signals, we are not at 2 seconds. We are at 1.5 seconds, maybe 2 seconds at maximum. So everything that we want to predict on top of it, so further into the future, we need then to understand if certain patterns are applicable to the rider behavior. And then for the further time horizon, one would need not the rider inputs only, but also environmental information, for example, from the radar.
Okay, thanks. Very much looking forward for the next presentation in 2 years then.
There's another question from the room, please.
Raphael again from WIVW. You have talked about the roll torque just in the beginning of your presentation, but your measurements show a lot of camera data.
Yeah.
Have you made any efforts on other measurement equipment to determine more about the force and torques happening between rider and vehicle?
So we decided to take the precision measurements because they are very easy to interpret. We investigated the roll torque in simulation because there we can easily measure it in the multi-body simulation. And we decided not to do this on the motorbike due to the complexity, and we also were not sure what's then the exact performance of such sensor. I know one example from literature, but we decided not to go this way on our test bike. Now we have the big advantage that if someone else is interested to use this kind of measurement on another type of bike, we could transfer it quite easily. That's the advantage we have then. Yeah.
And you have talked about several criterions like how the torque, the steering torque is behaving, etc. But could you already find some performance criterion that somehow do not consider the steering torque, but any other measurements instead? Like, I don't know, some yaw rates or anything changing due to the rider leaning input?
Yeah, I only showed the interesting plots, so the yaw behavior and everything else is not really changing. So I also have not shown the timing in the transfer behavior of the bike. So we are not only having an amplification between steer torque and motorcycle reaction, we also have a time gap between an input and the motorcycle reaction, but those time constants of the system remain the same. So we had no difference at all on the other behaviors of the motorcycle.
Could we maybe move forward, since I also have plenty of questions for Ludwig. Maybe we can grab him after the session and ask one or two questions, but then move forward now for the sake of timing. Sorry, Flo. So the next presentation is given by Hennes Fischer, I guess also in English, so I'll keep my introduction in English as well. Hennes Fischer works at Yamaha in the Netherlands, Yamaha Motor Europe in the Netherlands, as a senior advisor, and he has a background of mechanical engineering and journalism. I found that quite interesting when reading the description. So he was working in newspapers in southern Germany, then moved towards the motoring press. There are some two magazines I read when I was a bit younger, like the Mo and the Motorrad. And then mid-80s, of course, much before I read these newspapers, he moved to Yamaha and works there nowadays, representing Yamaha and ITEM in Brussels and also in different consortia. So he will be speaking about connected motorcycle accident analysis to prove ITS applications.
I need to push on. No. So, good morning. When we presented CMC in this conference, it was in 2018. Now, what happened since then? One important thing that happened is the IFZ Institute has joined CMC, and we are very happy that we get contribution on the safety side now. What also happened is we launched a basic specification for motorcycle ITS systems already in 2020. Unfortunately, this happened in the shadow, mainly due to the pandemic. We actually planned a demo at that time, but this was all cancelled. So we decided to carry on and go into the next phase of CMC, and we have many activities, and I'm gonna explain to you particularly about the accident research we're doing. And I learned from the accident researchers that the stuff we have been doing in CMC was done for the very first time. And you will see in the slides later, we particularly focus on understanding an accident between a car and a motorcycle predominantly at every second. So what happens at every second during a possible crash, in order to better understand how to tailor applications to avoid these crashes and warn motorcyclists and car drivers right in time. So I will go through the study, and we selected two types. I will explain later why. You get a short summary and then some conclusions and next steps. Let me quickly recap what is the mission of CMC. So the guys of you who joined in 2018 know this slide. It's basically to make motorcycle riding safer. And also our goal is to make sure that motorcycles will be included in future traffic scenarios. And we had a lot of talking now this morning on autonomous traffic, on ADAS systems, and so forth. Motorcycles are part of that. And by now, unlike back in 2018, the connectivity issue of motorcycles is in public awareness. So you see it in motorcycle magazines. I've given a couple of interviews recently to journalists, and they all come up with questions and say, will motorcycles be connected? Yes, they will. How they will be connected, and so forth. So again, mission and goal is basically the same. Now, what we do now in this phase of CMC, we, of course, look at connectivity, Connected Motorcycle Consortium is connectivity, obviously. But we also increasingly now look at ADAS systems. And I heard this morning, particularly in Aki's presentation, about ADAS systems and how they can help. Now, what we're doing is we're trying to understand where an ADAS system in a car would work and avoid an accident, and where we need connectivity, either on top of it or only connectivity would work. What scenarios would we need to look at? Now, talking about connectivity, I show you a slide now, which I've got last Friday in a conference, and this slide was presented by ASFINAG. ASFINAG is the Austrian road operator, and now I push the button. Now you will see many little dots on this highway. These little dots are connected vehicles already. So it's already happening. And if you look at the headline, we have more than 250,000 connected cars already on European roads. So what we are talking about regarding connectivity of motorcycles, that is around the corner. It's happening. So it's not a future discussion anymore. Good. This slide you've also seen in 2018. I picked it up again. And Aki, I think, mentioned it also. Sorry, mate, I didn't see you. The most frequent accident between cars and motorcycles is because the car driver doesn't see the motorcycle. And actually it doesn't mean he doesn't literally see it. We have about 30% only where you have a view restriction. In most of the cases, there's clear line of sight, but the car driver maybe would see it, or he sees it maybe, but he doesn't perceive it. So, oh, this thing is far away and doesn't matter to me, pull out, crash. And that is the main reason for the accidents. And as I said in the beginning, we need to understand the dynamics and the key factors of motorcycle to car accidents much better than we do today in order to define the applications for motorcycles. And also, that is important, also to help assist the car industry with our findings so that they, in the car, could also consider motorcycles in a more appropriate way. Okay, this just highlights what I said. We have between 50 and 70% of the accidents in general caused by other vehicles. Oh, why did this? Oh, I didn't push. Yeah, okay. 60 to 90% are obviously cars, and about 2/3 of the accidents happen at intersections. I think that is well known to you. It's just a recap. Now, this is more interesting. That is a result of our recent work. If we look at the blue bar is accident causer, is another vehicle. Again, predominantly car, but could also be a truck or a tractor or any other vehicle on the road. And you can quite easily see crossing traffic is one of the big problems. Then longitudinal and so on, I won't read it out. But if you look at left turn, now left turn is, compared to crossing, smaller number of accidents, but also a very high percentage of the other vehicle not seeing the motorcycle. And on top of that, the left turn is quite a dangerous accident in a sense that we have higher fatalities or death rates on left turns. Well, the reason for that is usually it's a bit higher speed, and you will see in the slide later the impact or the accident happens without prior notice. So we have a very short time to collision there. And therefore, we also looked at this accident. Now let me summarize. We looked at two accident types out of the crossing scenarios and the left turn scenarios. The crossing was the accident, the so-called 302, where a car pulls out from a secondary road, motorcycle is on the main road. Then we looked at the left turn. I think it's easy to understand. Car wants to turn left, motorcycle is oncoming, car driver doesn't see the motorcycle, problem. So that's the accident type 211. Now let me go a little bit into detail now. We used the German GIDAS database to analyze these accidents. The reason for that is the biggest in-depth database we have in Europe, probably worldwide. So we looked at all these accident scenarios. That was the first step. And we retrieved the general data you have in the accident database. And then we've done a second step, and that has never been done before. We simulated the accidents with a so-called PCM model, which WIVW developed. And that means we simulated, based on the data we know from the database itself, we simulated how the accident happened. And what we could draw out of the simulation is trajectories, maneuvers, deceleration, acceleration, and then with another module, we worked on understanding time to collision. And time to collision is one of the key factors if you design an application, because you simply need to know how much time do I have left till the accident happens. Now let's have a quick look at the causation of accidents. This is accident type 302. Obviously the priority was neglected by most of the car drivers. I think that's easy to understand. But also interesting if we look at multiple factors. Now this slide, unlike the slide before, shows three factors. The accident researchers and the police can name three additional factors on top of the priority violation of what they think has caused the accident. And one thing which comes up is the speed of participant B. So the motorcycle was supposed to be speeding. So that's, that's a prejudice. If we look closer, we will see that the speeding was actually, in most of the cases, between 50 and 60 kilometers an hour in a 50-kilometer zone, for example. That means we see no big difference to the behavior of a car driver. I'm just mentioning this because, you know, the prejudice, as you probably all know, is motorcycles are always too fast, very difficult to detect them. We could not find this in the data. There are no hard facts that say motorcycles are so much faster than cars. Yes, you have some, but in general, it was not the case. Now let's have a closer look to the key element, time to collision. For this accident, you can see that in more than 50% of the cases, we have a time to collision of 4.5, 5 seconds above. So that looks actually very promising, and I will show you in a slide later what 4.5 seconds mean. There were several studies done in the past to understand human reaction on time to collision. And Sebastian, in his presentation, did the motorcycle side, so looked at the motorcycle rider, trying to understand what the reaction times are. But I will show this in the conclusion later. This accident type looks very promising for connectivity. The key findings were, well, it's obvious they occurred at junctions. Then the car was the predominant accident causer. Participant B was usually a motorcycle, and so on. Let me just see what I haven't said. Yeah, I said it in the beginning. About 30% of the accidents only had view obstruction. So it confirms again what I said in the beginning. The car driver simply doesn't see the motorcycle, or doesn't recognize the motorcycle as something that is oncoming. It just sees something. Weather conditions were not a major factor. And in the last two maneuvers, the car driver did not accelerate, which means they just didn't see the bike. They just carried on. And the 4.5 seconds I already mentioned. Now, let's now go on to the next use case. That's the type 211. So left turn, and also it's easy to understand. There were mistakes when turning. That means, again, the car driver neglected priority of the oncoming motorcycle. The speed had a minor input as a main reason. The second slide are, again, these three different reasons. And again, the speed comes up. I don't need to explain it any further. I've already said it. It's within the range you would also see in cars. But now the interesting thing comes. Time to collision. Now this case looks quite different. And the average is about 1.5, maximum 2 seconds you have time, and that is not enough. Now, what's the reason for that? Obviously, it's very difficult to detect whether a car is turning left or not, or any vehicle is turning left or not. And you can only detect it at a very late point in time, technically speaking. And therefore, the moment where you notice something is going wrong is pretty much before the collision. Again, summary on this use case, 90% junctions crossing property exits. 17% only here. Only 17% had a view obstruction. That again means on the left turn, it's even more, say it's worse than the crossing. The car driver could see the motorcycle, but he doesn't. And that again highlights the need for systems to make the car driver aware of an oncoming motorcycle. Weather conditions, same as before, didn't play a major role. Yeah, the decelerate and accelerating fact is the same than on crossings. Actually, it should be one. So, summary. Motorcycles are overseen. We know that. Then there's mostly line of sight. So the car driver could see the motorcycle. As I said, connectivity has potential, and we've seen on crossing it has a very high potential. We have other cases where it's not the case, but we are looking forward to new technology developments to have connectivity also working on accident scenarios like the left turn. And the driver is in the loop. That means at the moment, connectivity means we warn the driver. If you look at assisting systems in the future, like emergency braking, etc., you have to make sure that connectivity has a certain level of functional safety, which at the moment is not there. That means at the moment we still rely, if it comes to connectivity, we still rely on warning systems, and the driver is still in the loop. And therefore, time to collision is one of the key factors, as I explained earlier. That shows, again, what I said in the summary. 203 and most of the crossing accidents very promising. The left turn, yeah, still a problem. next generation sensing and emergency braking, as I already said, could be a solution in the future. If you look at the left side, this is the extract of a study that was done by Brauer-Gleisner on collisions, head-on collisions. And you can quite clearly see where we have a critical issue with time to collision and where we have no critical issues. I know it's a bit difficult to compare this study with the studies we've done because we're looking at different accident scenarios, but just as an indication for you to understand roughly where we are if it comes to time to collision and the possibility for the driver or rider to react. Now, what we do next in the accident study, we're already looking at some other scenarios. I show some of them. And the study is about half finished, so I can't present you results. But we just simply want to understand the same issues, time to collision, how it happens, and so on these kind of accidents. And B is the motorcycle, A is the car. I think I don't need to explain the lane change scenarios in detail. I guess you're all familiar with them. So that's the next work that is coming up. Now, we've done that all with the German GIDAS database. We always get the question, why don't you do it in other countries? We're actually doing it, but we found it quite difficult to get a comparable data set in other countries. At the moment, we're looking at Italy and France. The challenges we have is we have different data in different format. I guess you all know this problem if you are in accident research for motorcycles. And then we have a different usage of motorcycles in the different country. We have to take this into consideration. And in particular in Italy or France, you may have to look at other scenarios than in the Germanic country or in Scandinavia, etc. And that is also highlighted by the fact that the urban accidents, for example, in Italy are 85%, in France 72%, and in Germany 60%. That shows you clearly where motorcycles and scooters are used predominantly in these different countries. So that means we look at different scenarios. Okay, different rider and rider behavior I've already mentioned. So yes, we're doing this. This is ongoing currently, and I hope I can present you some results at the next IFZ conference. I would also like to highlight to you, we have data and reports, white paper, and the basic specification already published on the website. Now, just go on cmc-info.net, go under, what is it, research, accidentology, conspicuity. You will find lots of documents already there. And one of the documents that shortly will be launched is, for example, the rider study that Sebastian talked about it. We've worked on path prediction. That was a very interesting presentation by Bosch. We've looked at that also. There will be a white paper being published. So what I want to encourage you, use the website, look at it, and if you have questions, contribution, if you know things better than we describe in the document, just give us a ring. I mean, we are a consortium. We try to understand and use the knowledge that is there to make motorcycling safer. Okay, last not least, this slide is the same that the Sebastians, you see the members. Yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fischer. Are there any questions? We might have some time for a few questions. Please take the microphone.
My name is Matti Kutila, coming from VTT, and thank you so much for sharing this pioneering work. That was great in order to get the kind of introduction how to those different accident types, how we influence. What I was a bit surprised, first of all, is that the weather conditions, the statement was that there wasn't that much influence on those different severity of the accidents, especially in the intersections. I thought that, for example, the heavy rain, there is a low friction, low visibility, which could make some impact. But anyway, that's how it is, and I do agree on that. What I was actually more wondering is that is there any impact if you have a different kind of a road surface type, whether you are driving into gravel or somewhere in the small road, you have maybe T-intersection or four-way intersection compared to when you are driving into asphalt?
Well, we didn't see any big difference regarding the surface, but also bear in mind, this is the GIDAS database, which has the data from the Dresden area and Hanover area in Germany. So it's not like in Finland, in your country, where you have, well, we have bad weather, of course, but if you compare it to like your environment, that is different. And that, of course, is not that much represented in this research, since the database is drawn from the areas I just mentioned. So the road condition didn't play a big role.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's another question. One quick one, please.
Yes, Thierry from University Gustave Eiffel. You told us that in a junction scenario, you have about 5 seconds for the time to collision. I'm very surprised by this value, because if we take into account that the speed in urban, for example, it's 50 kilometers per hour or 70 kilometers per hour, 5 seconds represents a distance of about 60, 70 meters or until 100 meters. And in urban area, you have, of course, lots of building or wall and so on, which can hide the PTW. So I would like to know if you take into account the visibility of a PTW in this scenario, or if you consider the possibility to detect it with communication by 5G or something like that.
It's only about connectivity. So the accident was only detected, assuming was only detected by connectivity. So it didn't matter whether the motorcycle was hidden or not in the simulation, because we assumed the motorcycle would send the message to the car would send the message to the motorcycle, they would exchange where they are, what they're doing, and this 5 seconds or 4.5 seconds were the point where both vehicles detected that something was going wrong. So the motorcycle was continuing, not braking. The car was actually pulling out or starting to pull out, and then we clicked the watch, the stopwatch, and said, how much time do we have now? And in 50% of the cases, the finding was that we had 4.5 seconds. So regardless whether the motorcycle was hidden or not, it was only in 30% of the cases where you had some obstacle between the car and the motorcycle.
Okay, then let me thank you again. Let me finish maybe with an also optimistic remark, and that is in the Euro NCAP world, the European New Car Assessment Program, they are testing passenger cars, ADAS systems, exactly in those cases, straight crossing or turn across paths. And they expect cars to have sensors seeing these motorcycles and automatically aborting the turning motion. So there's something also from another direction. We not only need to rely on connectivity, we can also rely on sensors, future ADAS systems, and with future I speak about the next 1 to 2 years when that's in the test program. So that's a bit optimistic.
Just to add to your optimistic view, we are involved in this discussion via ArtSem side.
Okay. So thank you again. The next presenter is Dr. Cosimo Lucci. Lucci, that was the name. Cosimo comes from the University of Florence, where he where he did his master's, where he did his PhD in industrial engineering, and nowadays is a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Industrial Engineering, and he works in the so-called moving research group, which looks at activities with motorcycles and passenger cars, 2- and 4-wheeled vehicles. And Cosimo will be speaking about defining suitable parameters for safe and effective deployment of motorcycle pre-crash braking systems, so AEB, automatic braking, and he will present findings from field testing and crash simulations. Cosimo, please.
Thank you for your introduction. I will present the study, which is the result of the collaboration between the University of Florence, Bosch Research, and the University Gustave Eiffel within the framework of Pioneers project. Pioneers project was an European-funded project with the general goal of enhancing rider safety, and in the study I will present will focus on the task involving the increasement of performance of onboard safety system. As already mentioned, the focus of our study was the pre-crash braking, also known as a motorcycle autonomous emergency braking, which is the power two-wheeler derivative of autonomous emergency braking for cars and truck, which already has been implemented and demonstrated to have very good impact, increase the safety of road users. For power two-wheelers, this technology is still in development, but preliminary studies indicated that it could have odds of intervention between 23 and 50% of motorcycle crashes. But before its introduction on standard vehicles, the main issues are related to the stability of the vehicle, the controllability and acceptability among end users of its intervention. And for this reason, we have to identify suitable parameters of intervention and technical requirements to make PCB safe and safely applicable and effective in mitigating injuries. We can divide the PCB working parameters in two main groups. Parameters related to the braking action of the motorcycle, and we have, for example, the PCB deceleration and the fade-in jerk required to reach the deceleration, and parameters more related to the triggering of the system, so the triggering of the automatic braking, so the strategy, and also the field of view and the range of the obstacle recognition tool required to detect obstacle and trigger the autonomous braking. Within Pioneers, we organized the work in two tasks. One task performed mainly by University of Florence, focused on field testing to assess the feasibility and the acceptability among users of a set of working parameters, while another task performed by University Gustave Eiffel in collaboration with University of Florence focused more on crash modeling and employed crash modeling to assess the applicability of a wider range of parameters and estimate the PCB benefits in terms of impact speed reduction and then injuries. So let's focus on the first part of the study, the second part of the study, the crash modeling, for which we used crash data from two databases, one from University of Florence and data from both the databases, 30 cases from University of Florence and 30 cases from University Gustave Eiffel, selected with different crash configuration according to the distribution in the two databases. And we use these 60 cases and we reconstructed these 60 cases on two different crash reconstruction tools, developed one from University of Florence and one from University Gustave Eiffel. These tools allow it to reconstruct trajectories of the vehicles before the crash through to the numerical simulations. And then we performed simulations employing different PCB working parameters. So 3 different triggering strategies, 3 levels of braking deceleration, and 2 levels of fade-in jerk, and different values of field of view and range. All these cases, all these parameters were tested through simulations with the triggering of the autonomous braking at the inevitable collision state defined based on the triggering strategy. This allowed to estimate the impact speed of the crash, and thanks to the simulation of the PCB intervention, we were able to estimate the benefits in terms of impact speed reduction. It would be very complex to show you all the results for each parameter, so we summarized these benefits and these results in terms of impact speed reduction with the three realistic set of parameters. We call them one pessimistic, which achieved an impact speed reduction of 2.8 kph, one average configuration which reached 10.7 kph of impact speed reduction, and one optimistic which reached 15 kph of impact speed reduction, just to the contribution of PCV intervention. As you can see in the box plot, there is difference between cases in which the whole data set and cases in which the PCB was currently triggering, because we have 25% of cases in which the PCB did not trigger, mainly because of the specific crash configuration, but also because in some cases the rider was already braking before the crash with a braking action higher than the PCB braking action. Let's come back to the second part, the first part of the study, the field testing activity. We performed field testing employing 2 test vehicles and involving 51 participants, common riders. The first test vehicle was a Ducati Multistrada, which was employed to test the PCB with 31 participants on 4 maneuvers. Straight line riding, lane change, slalom, and curve maneuver. And we tested 2 levels of deceleration, 0.3 and 0.5 G, and 1 level on fading jerk. This allowed to test the autonomous braking intervention, reproducing a PCB intervention 600 times approximately 600 times with this vehicle. While with the other test vehicle, a Piaggio MP3, a 2 front wheel scooter, which involved 20 participants and 2 maneuvers, straight line and lane change maneuver. We tested again 2 levels of decelerations and 2 levels of fading jerk, reaching about 400 automatic braking intervention tested. All these test protocol obtained the ethical approval by the University of Florence Ethical Committee, and the test was divided in different phases. After a first preparation of the participant, there was a warm-up and a familiarization with the track and the vehicle, a session to identify the participant's riding skill through manual braking, and a short familiarization on straight line with the automatic braking intervention. After that, there was the proper test session in which the rider was free to ride along the circuit, performing all the maneuver involved, and at several random times the automatic braking was deployed as unexpected for the rider. At the end, there was a final questionnaire and a brief interview. Let me show one video with the intervention of the system in straight line riding. The duration of the intervention was approximately 1.2 seconds. And the rider had to control the vehicle. This is, for example, a 0.5 G deceleration at a riding speed of approximately 50 kph. And similarly, in the lane change reproducing an avoidance maneuver. The rider had to perform the maneuver while the autonomous braking was braking the vehicle and avoid the obstacle represented by the blue cones. Again, the intervention was triggered before the maneuver, and the rider had to perform the maneuver while the braking was active. So coming to the result of this field testing activity, we can say that all these conditions we tested were well managed by riders, and riders were constantly able to control the vehicle and perform the maneuver. For example, for the avoidance maneuver, we have a paper published focusing on this part. The important thing is that riders were constantly able, with both level of interventions, to avoid the obstacle and execute the maneuver. Regarding the subjective assessment of deceleration, riders had a good feeling about the levels that we make them test. Generally was considered right or a little bit high, but in some cases, especially in lane change, some riders indicated as too high the 0.5G deceleration. This is something to keep well in mind when working on this system, but the important result is that riders were constantly able to control the vehicle, and no loss control was recorded during all these more than 1,000 intervention tested. And this is confirmed by the participants' opinion, general opinion on PCB, because before testing we had approximately 20% of participants who considered the system damaging, but after field testing with this set of parameters, no one considered anymore the system damaging, and more than 80% consider the system very useful or useful. So I tried to give you a summary of this whole activity, and the conclusion can indicate that from field testing we understand that PCB can be safely applicable not only in straight line, but also with a lean angle up to 25 degrees, and especially during maneuvers like lane change, which is very common in pre-crash conditions. And the other important result is regarding from field testing is regarding the high levels of PCB intervention that can be considered feasible. So deceleration up to 0.5G and the fading jerk up to 2G per second can be employed on standard vehicles in the condition we tested. And these, from crash modeling, these values are confirmed by crash modeling to be potentially effective in reducing the impact speed of the vehicle with a substantial speed reduction, ranging from 8, 10, 15 kph, depending from the triggering. And other important results from crash modeling indicate that the obstacle recognition parameters are very important, have a big influence on the efficacy of PCB. So what we call standard and progressive triggering can be effective, and field of views higher than 80 degrees and the range of the obstacle recognition tool higher than 30 meters can be enough to recognize obstacle and trigger the system properly. So I've concluded my presentation. Thank you all of you for your attention, and thank you also to all my co-authors from Bosch University, Gustave Eiffel, and University of Florence for this great collaboration.
Thank you, Cosimo, for that interesting presentation. We might have time for a few quick questions. Any questions? Nora, please.
Yeah, Nora Merkel from Würzburg Institute for Traffic Sciences. If I understood it right, your participants were informed about the pre-crash braking before the testing, and they experienced number of interventions. What do you think is the influence on the evaluation of the braking? You showed those evaluations about if the braking is right or too high or too low. Do you think there is an influence of getting used to the interventions during the test when the riders experience more and more interventions?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yeah, let's say we informed the participants after the preliminary questionnaire from which we took the answers about the damaging opinion of PCB. But yes, we had to inform them about the system that we're testing for, let's say, ethical reasons. The influence about the learning effect, let's say, about of PCB was studied, and we designed the test protocol in order to keep the participants as much as possible, let's say, distracted by the driving, performing different maneuvers, and triggering was once every more than 100 seconds in different maneuvers. So, of course, there can be a learning effect, but we did our best with this protocol to get participants as much as possible and prepared. And, yeah.
Thank you. Please take the microphone.
Hi, I'm Marilee from University of Florence, and my background is human motor control and human factors. I would just like to respond to this because I think it's a very interesting discussion. I've done a lot of literature review on studies looking at human reflex reactions, particularly in perturbation situations where they're unexpected. And in the research, typically you throw out the first trial because there's such a difference between the response of the first trial to the unexpected perturbation compared to the learning that happens basically instantly, and the responses measured at a muscular level become very different. So I would like to suggest that to integrate this kind of a feature, intervention, into actual use, that it would become a part of training, just like using ABS properly. And maybe even the system could have prompts. Maybe this could work for any of the automated safety interventions on motorcycles, that there's some kind of an app or interactive which makes sure that people practice regularly, at regular intervals, how to use the systems properly, and so they're not adversely surprised. Just a thought to put out there.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. You want to respond? I think it's a good idea, or otherwise...
We have another question, maybe?
Next question.
Hi, Rafael again. Thank you for the interesting presentation. Just two short questions. The one is about the vehicle types. You've shown that you've used a scooter and a motorcycle. So could you see any differences in the behavior there? And the second one would be about the sidearms that you've used in the experiments. Did they have any influence on the rider behavior? Because I would assume that the study participants were not really trained to work with those.
Thank you. The first question, we noted a few differences between the two test vehicles. Of course, there's big differences, and generally participants had more difficulties in controlling the vehicle, the scooter, because also from the different dynamic of the vehicle. They were, however, they were still able to control the vehicle, and the braking in terms of controllability were not so much different. So the maneuvers which they tested were similar, and the results were comparable, let's say a little bit more different for the scooter. Regarding the outriggers, all the participants almost everyone was new to this kind of systems, and they had about 10 minutes of warm-up to take to be confident with these systems. But they were not required to use it. They were put there just for safety, and no big influence was reported also by participants of this kind of extraction arms. We selected this kind of extraction arms because they were those which indicated the less influence on riding behavior.
Okay, thank you again for the presentation. Thank you for making it a bit shorter than the others, so that we now have only a slight delay of 5 minutes again, and this leads us to the final presentation for this session. That is given by Abdelkarim Moula. I hope that's pronounced correctly. Yes, thank you. Abdelkarim did make his master's in Algeria, and then another in mechanics, and then another master's at the University of Bordeaux in France in 2021. And since then, he's a PhD student at Université Gustave Eiffel, yes. In the laboratory of accident mechanism analysis. And he will speak about us. He will speak to us about benefit estimation of PTW advanced rider assistance systems on accidentology. So, Abdelkarim, please.
Thank you, Patrick. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. So I come back. Yes. So, no, my name is Abdelkarim Moula. I'm PhD student at the University of Gustave Eiffel, supervised by Thierry Sell and Ibrahim Riai, and I will present you our study on benefit estimation of power two-wheelers advancing rider assistance system on accidentology. So I want to inform you it's my first presentation in English, so I'm sorry for my accent language. I try to improve this. Thank you. So I begin this presentation by a short introduction where I will try to explain you a context, and I present you a list of technologies of ARAS, and finally objective of this study. Then I will present you methods used in this study and the results, and finally a conclusion of this study. So according to International Road Traffic and Accident Database, here we have comparison between cars and motorcycle fatalities in the world of from 2009 to 2019. We can clearly see that the number of car deaths has decreased, while that of motorcycle has increased, and it represents high levels. So among the solutions used to reduce the number of accidents and improve user safety, we have advancing rider assistance system. Their intervention can be passive or active. They work inside the vehicle, but they can be connected to external sources. So we can find two types of technologies of ARAS. We can find technologies, active technologies and passive technologies of advanced rider assistance system. For active technologies like ABS, anti-lock braking system, in order to avoid wheel locking. We have motorcycle stability control in order to avoid wheel locking in curve. We have traction control to balance the grip of tire with the road surface. We have anti-wheeling system that prevents the front wheel from coming off. We have also stoppie control. Contrary to anti-wheeling, stoppie is when the rear wheel has a tendency to take off and lose control with the road. We also have active cruise control. It adapts the speed of the vehicle according to the chosen distance. We have also launch control, preventing the loss of grip of the rear wheel when starting. And we have a combined braking system. It helps the rider to achieve an almost ideal distribution of braking force in different conditions. We also have autonomous emergency braking or pre-crash braking. It anticipates a head-on collision and mitigate and initiate a vehicle braking. And finally, we have anti-skid force in form of gas that escapes under pressure to create a force in the direction opposite to the skid and helps the rider regain control. So, about passive technologies, we can find dangerous turning warning to warn drivers about dangerous turn according to their instantaneous speeds. We have smart helmets. It monitors the driver alcohol and drug levels and check if they exceed a certain threshold. We have collision aversion technology. It's developed by Rad Vision. This passive system monitors the surrounding of the vehicle at 360 degrees. So, given that several interesting studies have been conducted in the subject in order to analyze different ARAS like ABS, CBS, or PCB, and based on the study that has already been carried out on the qualitative influence of the ARAS in the accidentality of powered two-wheelers, where it has been found that the ARAS such as anti-wheeling, launch control, and stopping control don't have any influence in accidentality of powered two-wheelers because they are intended for racing motorcycle. We conducted this study to analyze and evaluate the effectiveness of 3 other ARAS, like active cruise control, motorcycle stability control, and collision aversion technologies, in order to enlarge the number of analyzed ARAS and to make a better selection of technology to integrate on powered two-wheelers to improve their safety. Good. So for database used in our study, we used the database EDA. This database is performed at our laboratory LMA since 1985. The method based on the collection of the detailed data in real time at the scene of the accident in order to constitution of accident file and the reconstitution of the accident. It consists 210 powered two-wheelers cases. So, in order to analyze the effect of each technology on real accident situations, we have developed 3 different methods, so for CAT, for MSC, and for ACC. In the first technologies, we have analyzed the detectability of vehicles involved in relation of the motorcycle in order to determine an optimal detection distance. Here, so each accident was kinematically reconstructed in order to have the space continuum time of the motorcycle and obstacle vehicle during the accident, starting from the instant of the impact at t equals 0 seconds until their position at t equals 5 seconds before impact with an increment of 0.5 seconds. And finally, the distance and the angle of the obstacle vehicle recorded each instant with respect to the motorcycle position. Well, for the second technologies, the method used to determine the effect of MSC motorcycle stability control on EDA accident database is the same one developed on the previous study like Chevron or Lech. So in the first in the first step, we calculate the angle of inclination using the initial speed and the radius of curvature. Then we calculate the maximum deceleration using the force circle. And in the third step, we calculate the new speed collision, taking into account the maximum deceleration calculated in step 2 and braking distance measured at the accident site. And finally, we estimate the result. So if the new impact speed equals 0, that's mean accident avoided. If not, we look of angle of inclination or difference between new impact speed and last impact speed of the accident. So, and in the last method of the technologies of active cruise control, so we analyzed the dynamic and the accident rate of powered two-wheelers. We based on the only existing version developed by BMW. This device is composed of 3 variable detection distance, short, medium, or long, and 2 deceleration mode, comfortable and dynamic. For a more detailed analysis of this technology, we have oriented this study to do analysis of fixed distance levels from 10 to 15 meters with an increment of 10 meters in order to evaluate the effectiveness of this technology according to several levels and to define an optimal detection distance. So, here, for the methods, in the first, we look for the presumed moment of impact. That means the moment when the position of vehicles coincide, and this form the initial parameters of motorcycle and obstacle vehicle. Then in the second step, the final speed of the motorcycle vehicle was calculated from the presumed impact time calculated in step 1 and the initial parameters of the obstacle vehicle. And in the third step, from the final speed of the obstacle vehicle calculated previously. This state is dedicated to researchers of the distance covered by the obstacle vehicle as an intermediate parameters. And finally, here the data calculated in the previous 3 steps were used to obtain the final speed of powered two-wheelers by disjunction of cases. So for the result obtained on this study, for example, for the first technologies of collision aversion technologies, here we have the graph above show us the variation of the number of cases as function of time and with respect the distance between the motorcycle and vehicles involved on the 85 cases treated. So if you look by analyzing this graph, we notice that starting from 5 seconds before impact until 3 seconds, the distance between the motorcycle and other vehicles was higher than 50 meters for the majority of cases. And moreover, the graph, we also find that until 1.5 seconds before impact, the distance was greater than 20 meters on more cases. These large values of distance on very short duration before the impact show us the high degree of the speed at which the vehicle are driving on the analyzed accidents. And finally, here this graph also indicates that it was necessary to wait until 1 second before collision to see small distance lower than 20 meters, and at 0.5 seconds, all the vehicles involved are at distance lower than 10 meters. So, following the results presented at a detection of distance of 15 to 20 meters seems to us more adequate for a collision detection system. This is related to the reaction time of powered two-wheelers estimated between 0.8 and 1 second, and to allow them to perform an avoidance maneuver. So for the second technology for motorcycle stability control, here we obtain the MSC has an influence of 77% on the 26 selected cases. That means 20 cases. This influence varies between avoidance and mitigation. We can find that in 58% of the treated cases, that means 50 cases, the MSC could have avoided the incident, and in 90%, the MSC could have mitigated the impact. We also can find that in 23% of the accident treated, the MSC would have no effect on the accident. This can be explained on the one hand by the risk-taking and exorbitant speeding of some of powered two-wheeler drivers, and on the other hand by the vulnerability of motorcycle. Well, so for the second technologies of, so another interesting result is the comparison between ABS and MSC. Here we can find that the MSC can intervene on the 50 avoided cases, while the ABS can intervene on 7 cases. This describes the efficiency of MSC, which represents 2 times more avoided cases than an ABS in situation in curve. So for the last technologies, in order to evaluate the ACC and estimate this effect on the sample of 30 treated cases, 3 classes of benefits then formed: avoided, that's mean accident avoided, mitigated, That's mean collision avoidance, but ARAS could have mitigated the impact and no effect. So here, this graph shows the percentage of crash avoided only and crash avoided and mitigated, both of them, on the 30 cases according to the triggering distance in the two modes of deceleration. So here we can see the graph of dynamic scenario avoided and comfortable scenario avoided. And here we can see the dynamic scenario avoided and mitigated and comfortable scenario avoided and mitigated. So we have some remarks. First, so here we can see clearly that on a dynamic scenario and from a distance of 20 meters, more than 50% of tilted accident avoided. And in comfortable scenario, we can see that from a distance of 30 meters, the frequency of avoided cases is about 50%. And on the other hand, in the result of avoided and mitigated impact, we can see that in comfortable scenario and at 50 meters, for example, we go from 53 to 70%, while in the dynamic scenario, we go from 80% to 87%. So this shows us that even a comfortable scenario on ACC is beneficial to improve the safety of the riders. Finally, we find that in all accidents, a distance around 30 meters seems to be optimal because it represents a tipping point of the slope of the different curves, and it means that from 30 meters, we have less gain. So, a conclusion of this study quantitatively evaluated the effectiveness of three driver assistance systems developed for powered two-wheelers, like collision aversion technology, motorcycle stability control, and active cruise control. We find that in CAT technology offers a remarkable efficiency in terms of detection of other vehicles. We note that a detection distance of 15 to 20 meters seems to use more optimal to offer a sufficient reaction time to the riders. And for MSC technology has an influence of 77% on the accident created. We find that in 58% of the created accident could avoided, and on 90% the created cases the impact could mitigated. And finally, for the ACC technologies, offers a remarkable efficiency in terms of avoided accident, where we can clearly see that in dynamic scenario we managed to avoid more than 50% of related accident. It can be seen that from 30 meters we have less gain of avoided or strongly reduced impact. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Abdelkarim, for the presentation. Are there questions from the floor? I ask this for the final time, since it's about to be a lunch for you after this question round. So, any questions? Since you seem to be hungry, let me ask then maybe one final question before you can have lunch. Abdelkarim, what about you speak about the detection distance for ACC, but do you assume that this also includes the processing of the data and the decision strategies, etc.?
So here we speak only about the detection distance. So the decision of the riders, we know study this, this analysis.
So you're speaking about an intervention at 30 meters,
yes,
something like that. So of course that means that the detection and everything else has to be finalized before the 30 meters.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you for this clarification.
Thank you.
So thank you, Abdelkarim, again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and for your attention. And I wish you good lunch now. Thank you.